Have you ever experienced sleep paralysis? It's one of the strangest, most fascinating, yet horrifying sensations you can endure. Imagine waking up and finding yourself completely unable to move. Your senses are fully intact, but you're caught in this twilight zone, half asleep, half awake. I had heard countless stories about it long before it happened to me, but nothing could prepare me for the terror of experiencing it firsthand. I've only gone through sleep paralysis once, and that was more than enough. It happened during college when I was going through an incredibly stressful period. Finals week was upon me, and I wasn't getting much sleep. I remember it was the night before my last biology exam. I had stayed up late cramming and finally decided to call it a night, but I don't recall exactly when I fell asleep. All I remember is drifting off into a blur of exhaustion, and then blackness. Suddenly I was back in my room, lying in my bed, but something felt off. There was a strange haziness clouding my awareness, as though I was awake yet paralyzed. I tried to move, but I couldn't. My limbs felt heavy and unresponsive. I could only move my eyes, scanning the darkened room. As I looked to one side, then back to the center, I saw her, a woman standing in the middle of my room, facing the bed. She was wearing a long black dress and holding something long and thin. I wanted to call out, "Mom?" but my lips wouldn't move. My voice was stuck in my throat. The woman moved closer, slowly, until she knelt down and placed her hand on my forehead. I felt the cold touch of her skin. She leaned in, her eyes locking with mine, and I realized with horror that she had my mother's face. I tried again to call out to her, but my voice was trapped in my paralyzed body. She stood up, walked to the doorway, and vanished into the darkness of the house. I lay there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity, probably only another 10 to 20 seconds, before the fog lifted and I could think clearly again. I bolted upright, heart racing. I jumped out of bed, screaming "Mom" repeatedly, and dashed into the hallway, calling out for her. A door down the hall opened, and someone came to comfort me. But it wasn't my mom. It was my dad, pulling me into a tight hug. He told me he missed her too. My mom had passed away 3 weeks before this happened. Years ago, I had my first terrifying experience with sleep paralysis. I remember lying in bed, feeling this inexplicable sense of dread, convinced there was something evil lurking in my closet. I knew I was dreaming, and I kept telling myself to face my fear, to look directly at the closet door. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't force my gaze to land on it. Every time I moved my eyes, my head would turn away. Then I woke up, drenched in sweat. I felt a brief moment of relief, thinking it was over, but that comfort was fleeting. I realized almost immediately that I wasn't awake after all. I was still in bed, still unable to move, and that same sinister presence was still there in the closet. Though I didn't hear it with my ears, I felt this awful, mocking laughter wash over me, radiating from the closet in sickening waves. Suddenly, a human head was hurled at me from the darkness, landing squarely on my chest, staring up at me with lifeless eyes. It was a girl I had known in high school. Up until that point, I had been terrified, but now I was beyond that, utterly panicked. I tried to scream, to move, but all that came out were muted grunts and moans. My body was rigid, unyielding, as I desperately tried to shake off the head. This went on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a minute or two before I finally, truly woke up. The experience left me so traumatized that for weeks after, I was terrified every time I woke up, afraid I wasn't actually awake and that something horrible was just moments away from happening. The memory of that laughter still makes my skin crawl. At the time, I had never heard of sleep paralysis or night terrors, and I honestly thought I was losing my mind. What's always fascinated me about dreams is how vague and bizarre they can be, like stepping into a world where the usual rules don't apply. But when that dreamlike quality crosses over into the waking world, that's when things get terrifying. I was in REM sleep, caught in a nightmare where some strange creature was following me through a dense forest. The dream was disjointed and hazy, and I eventually woke up. Or at least, I thought I did. I was back in my bed, but I couldn't move a muscle. I was stuck in my own body, paralyzed. As I lay there, I began to hear a faint, eerie sound. Something between a mechanical hum and a whisper. It was rhythmic, repeating every few seconds. I noticed it was getting louder and louder. I felt this unnerving sensation that the noise was approaching, getting closer and closer until it was deafening, a terrible pressure building in my head. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My eyes were drawn to the closet door, specifically to the narrow gap where the door was slightly ajar, something I never leave open. In that sliver of darkness, I saw it, a distorted face peering out, grinning unnaturally wide, its mouth hanging open in a sinister smile. Every time the noise pulsed, the face seemed to get closer, and the closet door inched shut. Suddenly, the door slammed closed with a bang, and the room fell into silence. A moment later, I regained control of my body. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. I may have been 24 years old, but I sprinted straight to my parents' room, waking my dad to come and check the closet with me. There was nothing inside, nothing anywhere in my room. My dad calmly explained that what I experienced was likely sleep paralysis. He had gone through it once too, but his words did little to calm my nerves. I was still deeply disturbed by what I'd just witnessed. I've experienced sleep paralysis 3 times in my life, and while the first 2 were scary, the third was downright horrifying. It was early morning, around 5 or 6 a.m., just as the sun was beginning to rise. The room was dimly lit, just barely enough to see. I tried to move, but I was stuck, trapped in that familiar feeling of paralysis. My eyes were fixed on the wall, unable to look away or move. Then I heard it, heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. One by one, my family appeared. My brother, my sister, my dad, and my mom. They were all sobbing uncontrollably, and they all seemed unnaturally tall, like giants. They walked up to my bed, standing beside it, looming over me, still crying. I wanted to scream, to tell them to stop, that they were scaring me, but I couldn't. They were towering so high, their heads were nearly touching the ceiling. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they turned and walked back down the stairs. The moment they left, I could move again. I jumped out of bed and raced downstairs to find them, but the living room was empty. I checked each of their rooms, and they were all there, fast asleep. My heart was racing, my mind reeling from what I had just experienced. I leaned against the wall, trying to calm down, my breathing heavy and erratic. There was no going back to sleep that morning. I lay awake until daylight filled the room. A few days later, I was hit by a car while crossing the road with friends. I ended up with 3 broken bones and a fractured thigh. I was in the hospital for a week, and at one point, all 4 of my family members stood next to my hospital bed, looking down at me, my mom crying just as she had in my vision. The scene was almost identical to what I had seen during sleep paralysis. I'm not a superstitious person, but if I were, I'd be convinced that dream was some sort of premonition. Even now, I get chills just thinking about it. It was the summer of 2016, and I had been out late drinking with friends. We were wandering around town and through the neighborhood when one of my friends pointed out a figure hiding in a bush. He said, "Look over there," and we all turned to see what he was talking about. Sure enough, there was something, or someone, crouched in a bush outside a house. Curious and emboldened by alcohol, we crept closer to get a better look. As we neared, a strange, unsettling noise began emanating from the bush, a sound that was both eerie and unearthly. We screamed, half in fear and half in laughter, as we ran away from the bush. It was terrifying, yet oddly amusing, the kind of weird encounter you laugh about with friends. Eventually, we all went our separate ways, assuming the person in the bush was just trying to scare people for fun. That night, I fell into a drunken sleep, but I wasn't out for long. I awoke in near total darkness, my room pitch black. I tried to move, to reach for my phone to check the time, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Only my eyes could move, darting around the room, searching for something, anything. Then, that same noise from the bush filled the silence, this guttural, inhuman sound. My eyes locked onto the foot of my bed, and what I saw was pure nightmare fuel. A grotesque, demonic face hovering in the darkness. It wasn't floating, though. It had a body, but it blended so seamlessly into the blackness of the room that only its face was visible, its mouth hanging open, producing that terrible sound. It inched closer, coming right up to my face, its breath hot and foul, before suddenly fading into nothing. I let out a scream, finally able to move. I bolted upright, heart racing, drenched in sweat. I switched on the lamp and scanned the room, but whatever it was had vanished. The experience felt so real, too real. It was like I was fully awake, yet I couldn't comprehend what I had just witnessed. I told my parents about it the next day, and they chalked it up to sleep paralysis, though they admitted they'd never heard of anyone seeing something so vivid and terrifying. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed our stories and would like to hear more, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you captivating tales and new content every week. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We appreciate every one of you for being a part of our storytelling journey.